A quick word for those of you who may not be as familiar with Zooming. Right now, if you have your screen in speaker view, you will see Max and his beautiful bride, Betty, and you'll see me as well. You can also switch to gallery view so you can see all the other screens. Once we start, I'll have everyone else on mute, aside from Max. And if you have any questions throughout the program, I invite you to put them in the chat or jot them down. We will take questions, but we want to let Max share his whole story first. But then Max is very willing to speak with all of us. I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to remember, and so we will have that opportunity for sacred memory as well at the end. So now, though, is an opportunity to come together. And I think, as all of you who know me that whenever we start a program, I feel it's important for us to do so with a blessing. And so I think what kind of a blessing or prayer can we listen to now at this time when we're about to hear a very difficult story? Well, the blessing that we hear now is the blessing of being together, the blessing of friendship that I now have with the Steinmetzes, the blessing of being a sacred community, whether you're part of the official Temple of Israel family or part of our extended family or part of the family of the Steinmetzes. And I'm so grateful to see so many of you with us today. So the blessing I offer is a blessing of the blessing we say when we study Torah, because what we're going to hear as we hear Max's story is a bit of Torah. It is a bit of the lesson of the law. It is a bit of hearing what has happened. And just like we know that our Torah is our story, our history, when we hear Max's story, it's not just his story, but in fact, it's our story for all of us. So I say the blessing of the La'asok b'divrei Torah. Feel free to join with me if you'd like, or say amen at the end. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who commands us to engage in the study of Torah. And for that, let us all say, Amen. Once again, I remind you to feel free to write any questions in the chat, and I will monitor them. You can write them to everyone. You can write them specifically to me. We'll take time to answer questions at the end. I am recording our service, and it will also be on Facebook, or excuse me, our program, if anybody wants to share that later. So real quick, and then I'll turn it over to my newest and dear friends, Max and Betty. How did I get to meet Max, and how is Max with us today? Well, a few of you may have heard me say this. I was fortunate enough to get to know Max and Betty by chance. I was watching a program. Some of you may have heard of the DJ and Broadway star Seth Rudetsky. He has a program called Stars in the House. And from one connection to another, Max was featured on his program all about the Yiddish version of Fiddler on the Roof. And I said, oh my gosh, this story is amazing. I need to hear more of it, and I need to connect to Max. So I reached out to Seth Rudetsky. And for those of you who don't know, I was like reaching out to someone who was kind of famous in my mind. So it's kind of like as if I had sent a message on Twitter or something, so that I could find someone else famous in my book now, which is Max. And so Seth was very kind enough to put Max in touch with me, and I emailed Betty and Max. And within that first phone call, I know some of you may find it hard to believe, but within that first phone call, we became quick friends. And Max and Betty have already been to one of our Shabbat services over Zoom. And we did play some Jewish geography with the Smith family. Therefore, it was an official event. Now we know it was official, but we've connected ever since. And as soon as I heard about Max, I said, we've got to share this story, not only with our congregants, particularly with our youngsters, but with anyone who can hear about his story of survival. And let me also, if I can say this as well, Max, we are grateful to you to be doing this with us, especially as you have recently celebrated a birthday. So I hope when all of this is over, we can all also kind of share a little bit of a birthday celebration with you as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Max with Betty, his bride, by his side. And so Max, thank you so much for being here. Welcome. And we look forward to hearing all that you have to say as you share with us your story of survival.
Well, Rabbi, thank you so much for a beautiful introduction. I couldn't have possibly asked for anything nicer than that.
Thank you.
I'm going to make that short, and I'm going to tell you about what happened to me, my family during the Second World War. I was born in a place called Târgu Puș. At the time when I was born, it was part of Romania. In 1938, Germany, Adolf Hitler, gave this territory to the Hungarians. So we were no longer Romanians, we became Hungarians. And as far as the Jewish people, our living, our existence, everything has changed immediately. With the German troops coming in, life became very, very difficult. So in let me check it over to make sure I got it right. In 1944, May 1944, they took us into a ghetto. One morning, we had a town crier. Now, remember, this was in old Europe. As a matter of fact, we didn't even have electricity in our village, but we did have a town crier. There was a man with a drum, and he would walk around and stop on the corners of streets and beat his drum, and the people would come outside and listen to his messages. But this morning, the message was, all Jews, young and old, male and female, everybody will report, and he told us where to go. This was a place, it was an abandoned brick factory. At one time, they used to manufacture bricks for buildings, but it was abandoned, and we were told to report to this place. As I said, an abandoned brick factory. And you must report. If you don't, we will come and get you, and you will imprisoned immediately. So we knew that they meant business. But we got up and we started walking towards this brick factory. We didn't have a car or a carriage or anything. We walked, I'd say about a couple of 2 miles. We walked. This was an old factory that they used to manufacture brick for buildings, but it was abandoned. So they had these huge buildings sitting there empty. We walked over there, and there was the Hungarian gendarmes or police. They were waiting for us. As we got there, they told us to go into these empty buildings and take our place. We walked in, and these were empty buildings, and we sat down on the floor. There was only a place to sit down, and we were waiting for instructions. Well, before long, the Hungarian police came in, and they asked us to come outside, line up, and they started to register us all. and they assigned places. They wanted to make sure that approximately 200 goes into each building. And after we were all put into these buildings, we were told that we're going to line up at 6 o'clock that evening for supper. We're lined up, and they gave us each a canteen, aluminum canteen, and they put some so-called soup. It was merely warm water. And we went back to our barracks, and we stood there. And after we finished, we went back to our barracks, and we spent the night. In the morning, they woke us up with a siren, and we walked up to a building where they gave us so-called coffee and a cereal for breakfast. After that, we went back to our buildings where we stayed, and the young people went out to work. The elderly didn't have to go, but we did. They took us, and they made us clean the streets, clean municipal buildings, and do all sorts of work. And as a matter of fact, the German troops used one of the highways in the middle of the town to travel through. And they made us clean the highway and so on. And then the following day, we went back and did the same thing. This was going on for some time. So eventually, it started off in the end of April, and then in June, beginning of June, they lined us up in the morning, and they walked us down to the railroad station. Everybody. They even took the people that were sick, everybody down to the railroad station. When we got there, we faced a line of freight trains. These are trains that the doors open up on the side. They used to transport cement, lumber, grain, and sometimes cattle. And these were freight trains. They opened up, they set the thing, and they told us to crawl into these wagons. People that couldn't make it, they would pick them up and toss them in. And they would fill up these freight trains. If you sat down, you couldn't stand up. If you stood up, there's no room to sit down. And the reason they did it, they were afraid they may run out of space and they'll have some people left over, and then what? So they put them as many as they could on each freight train. They even brought people from hospitals. They went to the hospitals, took all the sick people out of all the Jewish people that were sick out of the hospitals. If there were some couples, they had children born there, they brought them along and they put them into these freight cars without any baby food or anything, just put them in there. After they finished, they locked these gates, doors, and off we went. Now this was probably around 12 o'clock noon. And we traveled from 12 noon till about 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock that night. And since this has been in April, the weather was nice. We traveled and they stopped somewhere in a parking lot. And they opened up the doors and they told us to get out of these cars and go into the woods and take care of our physical needs and then come back and climb back in. And they told us not to try to run off because they're gonna catch us. They told us they have soldiers in the woods, and if we try to escape, we'll be caught and they're gonna execute us immediately. So we did exactly as told. We got in and we got back, they locked us back in, and we took off again. And we traveled like that for 3 days. No food, no stop for toiletry, nothing at all. Just as it was for 3 days and nights, we traveled and we arrived in a place called Auschwitz. I'm sure you've heard that name. When we got to Auschwitz, they opened up these doors and they made us climb out of the cars. And in front of us was a man called the Angel of Death. His name was Dr. Joseph Mengele. He was the head, he was in charge of Auschwitz. He was a medical doctor by profession, but he was the head. He was all dressed up, and I see him now standing in front of me with a pair of black leather gloves on and a whip in his hand, and he had sidearms on him, and he stood there and he lined us up six abreast, and he said he's going to point to the right and to the left, and we are supposed to follow his instructions. We did. I have a brother who was a year younger than I. I was 18, he was 17. I had a little sister that was 6 years old, and my elderly parents. And my brother and I were pointed to the left. My parents and my little sister were pointed to the right. And after they finished unloading the car, the truck, they told us to go to the left and they went to the right. And we did exactly as told. When we got there, they told us to empty our pockets on the ground and just sit there and wait. So they told us after an hour or so, take our clothes off, and they gave us uniforms. The uniforms were a two-piece outfit, a pair of pants and a jacket. And this was a white with blue stripes. And they gave each, they didn't ask you what size you wore, they just handed you one. Now, I being 6'1" tall, got something that fit somebody who was 5'4", 5'4", 5'5". The pants were too short, the jacket, the sleeves off, but was nothing I could do about it. So I asked one of the capos. The capos were people who worked there, who were also Jewish prisoners, but they were there longer. They were there for some time, and they helped out. They were told what to do, and they followed through with instructions. So I asked one of them, and I said, the suit doesn't fit me. What do I do? He says, well, he said, just walk around and see if somebody got one that doesn't fit him. And I did. I found a little fellow, who they gave a big suit. So we exchanged suits. So finally, I got something that fitted me. So after we were all dressed up, they led us into a barrack. We walked into this barrack, and in the barrack, there was a family. They were gypsies, or Romanis, as they called them. They were gypsies, and he was the head of this barrack. He and his family lived in the barrack, but he was also a prisoner, but he was a German gypsy. So we got in there, and in the barrack, they had layers where you lay down, and they had different levels. We lay down on the floor, and then they had a layer 6 feet above, and then 12 feet, and every 6 feet, they had a layer, like 5 different layers. And people had to climb up there to have a place to stay. We spent the night there, In the morning, we got up, and they lined us up, and we lined up to get a slice of bread, and we just sat around there, not knowing what to do. That day, I walked outside, and there was a fence right in front of me. And I looked at the fence, and I saw people hanging on that fence. And I looked and looked, and I could not understand, why are they doing that? So a prisoner walked by, and I stopped him, and I asked him if he knew why they're hanging. He said, sure. He said, they committed suicide. He said, those fences are electrically charged, and people just go there and they commit suicide. So I looked around, and I saw people hanging on these fences all over. And he asked me, when did you get here? And I said, just a couple of days ago. He said, did your parents, did they go to the left? And I said, yes. So he said, look to the right. He said, you see the smoke over there? I said, yes. He said, what they're doing is now, they're burning your parents to death. My parents and my little sister went to the crematoriums, and that's what they were. They were killing them that day. So I said, my God, what's happening to us? Well, we were there for about 5 days. They fed us once a day. After 5 days, they marched us to the railroad station, and they put us into railroad cars. But this time, they were regular railroad cars. They were not those freight trains. They were passenger cars, but they were third class. They were okay. They had benches in them and places to sit down. And after we were all loaded up, they took off with us, and we traveled from Auschwitz, which is in Poland. We traveled to Dachau, which is in Germany, in Bavaria. Dachau is around maybe 80 kilometers from Munich or München. It took us a couple of days to get there. They didn't feed us. And when we got there, they assigned us to barracks, and we stayed there in these barracks for about 3 days again. They fed us once a day. After the third day, they loaded us on trucks. They must have had an armada of 100 trucks. And they rode us, and they took us to a place called Kaufering. It's a village in Bavaria, and they took us to a camp. This was a camp. It was a fence around us, and they had barracks. The barracks were small barracks, just big enough for maybe about 20 people to get into a barrack. And they assigned 20 into each barrack. My brother and I went into one of these barracks, and we looked around, and there was nothing. It's just some straw on the floor. And we looked, and we were told, this is where we're going to sleep, on the straw. And they gave each of us a blanket. So I had a blanket, my brother had a blanket. So we took one blanket and put it on the floor, and the other blanket, we covered ourselves. We slept in our clothes because there was nothing else to do with the clothes. There was no place to put them, even had you taken them off. So there was no reason to take them off. You didn't have any pajamas, and it was too cold to take them off. So you slept on them on the floor, on a cold floor, but that's where we slept. So we had one blanket on the floor, and the other blanket, we covered ourselves. In the morning, at 5 o'clock, a siren went off. And we were told the night before, when the siren goes off, we go outside and we walk over to the kitchen. And we walked over to the kitchen, and we each had a canteen, aluminum canteen that had a handle on it. We walked up to the kitchen, and the kitchen had a window, and we lined up by the window, and inside there was another prisoner, or they used to call him Häftling in German. There was another Häftling in there, and he would pour hot water, a colored water, into our pot, and it was called coffee, and hand us a slice of bread. That was our ration for the day. One slice of bread in a cup of black water, warm water. We took that and we walked and marched to the main gate. We ate our piece of bread right away because we were hungry, and drank that warm water, and we lined up at the gate. When we got to the gate, there were people outside the gate, German contractors that came and requisitioned people for the day. For instance, if somebody was a builder and he was building a warehouse and he needed help, he needed 20 people for that day, he would request 20 people, and they would give him 20 prisoners. In return, he would pay the German army so much a day per person working for him. So every morning we would line up like that and taken out to work. And some days it was a good place to go to work. By good, I mean, they treated us all right. They fed us at noon. They gave us something to eat. They didn't overwork us. They didn't beat us. Other days, it was a bad day. They were mean. They were typical German Nazis. They would beat us. They wouldn't feed us. So it was always depending on what happened. As a matter of fact, one day, day I'll never forget. It was Yom Kippur morning, 1944. We lined up in the morning and get our bread and coffee. So, and then after we got our coffee, we lined up to go to work. In the line in front of me, and as I said, the minute we got it, we ate it up. Even though it was Yom Kippur, we ate it up, except one person. He was in front of me, and he wouldn't eat the piece of bread. And a German guard was watching us. He apparently knew that the man in front of me was a religious Jew or a rabbi. Somehow somebody tipped him off. And he wouldn't eat his bread. So he came over and he said to him, "I want you to eat your bread." He said, "Sir, this is a holiday that we fast. It's called Yom Kippur, and I can't possibly eat. I got to wait till this evening." He said, the guard said, "I said, eat your bread." And the guy said, I'm sorry, I can't. I have to wait till tonight." So he grabbed them at his collar and pulled them out. We went off to work. We came up that night, come back home, and there was the rabbi hanging on the gallows. You see, each gate has gallows on both sides. And if somebody was punished, they would hang him on the gallows so that we could see him when we came in, and there would be a sign hanging on his chest telling the crime that he committed and the punishment that he got. So that evening, there was the rabbi hanging on the gallows with a sign, he disobeyed the order of the German officer. He wouldn't eat his piece of bread. That was one day, that's it. Another day we came home, there was a father and son. The son was a 14-year-old little boy, but he was very tall. Even though he was 14, usually he would have never made it to that camp, but he was very tall. And the angel of death, Joseph Mengele, just looked at him, and he looked like he could do some work. So he was put into the labor group rather than to the gas chambers. So the father and son, the crime that he committed is, they also said when they gave us the towel, when they gave us the blanket, they also gave us a towel, and you had to wear that towel in your neck like a scarf, so that when you come home at night, the guards could see that you still have the scarf. Well, one night, the father and son came back from work, and they pulled them out. And they pulled them out. And the following night, when we came home, the father and son were hanging on the gallows with a sign telling us that he cut up his towel and he made, his son had shoes, he didn't have any socks. And the father took a towel and cut it in two. And the boy used the pieces of towel to wrap his feet in. And he wore those instead of socks. And there was a no-no. And he paid with his life with that. Each night, somebody was on the gallows for something unbelievable. But nevertheless, whatever they did, for them happened. I'll tell you what happened to me. It was spring 1945. The Americans were coming closer and closer and closer. And I was working at the time at a complex that manufactured airplanes called Messerschmitt. That was the name of the German company. They were building German military airplanes. They built an airplane called the Stuka. It was an attack plane that they used on the Russian front. And we were working in this plant. Now, we didn't build any airplanes, but we loaded trucks, we unloaded trucks, we built runways, we did all kinds of work in this plant. Well, one day, and the Americans started bombing these factories. They would come in the daytime. This was already 1945, the spring of 1945, and the Americans were getting closer and closer, and the bombs would come and be dropped on these factories. Well, they had a system. If the Americans attacked, they would have 7 short beeps, like beep, 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 7 short. If it's 7 short, you run for cover. Now, everybody but us, we were not allowed to run for cover. The cover was for the German overseers, for the German guards, anybody but prisoners. We had to stay there and just look up, and we would wave to the planes to drop the bombs. I'm sure they didn't see us, but we thought they saw us. And we begged them to drop the bombs, which they did. They bombed the railroad tracks, the railroad station, did a lot of damage. Well, one day, while they were bombing, a group of us, ran into a little building, which was called a Stube. We went in there, and this was a place where the German guards and the German people working there would keep their luncheons. They had rucksacks or backpacks with their luncheons in it, and they would be hanging. They had nails in the wall, and they had their rucksacks hanging on these nails. We went in there, and we were very, very hungry. they didn't feed us a few days there. We got there, we grabbed these rucksacks and we ran out and we ran down to a lake. There was a lake there. We went to the lake and the Americans dropped their bombs on the railroad tracks, did a lot of damage on the tracks, on the railroad station. And we went down to the lake. We sat down. We were not worried about being hit. We opened up and I found a loaf of bread and a whole salami in this backpack. I sat down, believe it or not, I ate the whole thing in one sitting. And what do we do with a backpack? We were afraid they're gonna find them. We put rocks in them and we threw them into the water, into the lake. So we did that so they won't find any evidence. And we finished eating, we went back up to work and the bombing stopped and we started cleaning up the damage they did. And then in the evening, we lined up to go back to the camp. As we lined up, we usually lined up 6 abreast. As we lined up, suddenly the commanding officer says, Achtung, Achtung, now hear this. Those of you that stole our backpacks and went down to the lake to eat, step up. If you don't, we're gonna shoot every 10 of you. We're gonna count to 10 and you get shot. Nobody moved, absolutely nobody. Nobody moved, okay? Nobody moved, so he says, okay, we'll try something else. They brought German shepherds, dogs, and they walked the dogs between the lines and let the dogs sniff those that ate the salami and so on. So I said, well, here we go. The dogs started walking down and they did not sniff on anybody. Now, we couldn't believe it, but we believed the miracles. We said, oh, this is a miracle. Not one dog stopped at any of us. While they were still walking, suddenly a jeep drives up and a German officer gets out and he says to the guards, what are y'all doing? And the guard says, sir, let me explain what happened. He says, I don't want to hear what happened. You need to take them back to camp. They're going to lock the gates. And what are you going to do with them at night? Where are you going to put all these people? I said, get going immediately. But sir, let me explain. I don't want to hear it. So he never explained. He took us all back to camp and let us go and we escaped without any damage at all. I'll tell you one other instance that happened. In the following week, the Americans kept coming closer and closer. Suddenly, they decided not to go out to work anymore. It's too dangerous. So we worked outside where the German officers and their families lived, outside the camp. They had barracks where they lived in, and they took us out there to clean up. They had gardens they wanted us to clean up. And they had a kitchen there for the German people. And I had a friend who worked in this kitchen. And he worked in that kitchen that day. And I knew he was going to be there. And he knew that I was out there working on the yard. Well, I was working on the yard, and I turned around, and I saw him going downstairs into the cellar where they kept the vegetables. And then a few minutes later, he came upstairs, and he nodded his head to me. So he went back in. After he left, I went over there, and he put some potatoes and some carrots on the edge, on a step. So after he left, I went there, I took him and put him in my pocket and went back to work. A few minutes later, after I got back to work, suddenly I hear, Achtung, Achtung, which means attention, attention. Prisoner, 72041. That was my number. And we carried their numbers on our back, real big letters on each bag. 72041, that was me. 72041, report immediately to the commanding officer and room number. He gave me the room number, 2000, and it report. I did, I walked over, I looked for the number, I found it. I walked over there and he was sitting on the porch and he said to me, okay, empty your pockets. I did, I took the potatoes and the carrots he gave me, I put them all out. He said, do you know that those were stolen, don't you? So I didn't answer him. He said, somebody gave them to you, didn't I said, yes. He said, they were stolen, and I answered him. He said, okay, just a minute. He picked up the phone and he called the guard at the gate. He told the guard, I found one of the one of the prisoners that stole some vegetables from the cellar. I want you to punish him. I want you to give him 25 on his behind, and I want him to count into the telephone. I want to hear him count from 1 to 25. And the guy said, yes, sir. And he told me to go to the guard. I did, I went over there, I went in. He said, so you're the one that stole the vegetables? And I didn't see anything. He said, okay, lower your pants. I did. And he said, okay, lean over. There was a bench. Lean over the bench. I did. And he said, I want you, and he put a telephone down there. And he said, I want you to count from 1 to 24. And I said, oh, yes, sir. And I said, I'm finished. I knew it was going to happen sooner or later. So I laid over and I said, 1, and nothing happened. And I said, 2, nothing happened. And I went all the way to 24, and I said, my God, I only got 1 left. What's going to happen? I 24, and he hit me so hard that the bench that was leaned over broke under me. And he grabbed me by my collar, my jacket. He opened the door and he threw me outside. I was laying there for a few minutes. I finally composed myself. I got up and I walked into the camp. And as I walked in, I fell down on the ground and I couldn't get up. Suddenly I looked around and I saw some of my friends were standing over me. And they said, Max, what's the matter with you? I said, I got hit by the guard. So they grabbed me and took me into a barrack and laid me down. Well, I recovered. I recovered fine. As you can see, here I am. So those things happened. Okay, so a few days later, the Americans kept getting closer. They finally got very close and they decided to evacuate the camps. So one afternoon, they made an announcement. They took us all out on a, what they call the Umplatz. It was a place where we used to line up every morning, where they used to count us. We went to the Umplatz and we lined up as usual. And they made an announcement and they said, we're going to divide you into 2 groups. We're going to have those of you that feel healthy, go to the right, and those of you that don't feel good, go to the left. But I forgot to tell you, but let me tell you what, before I go further with this, what happened with my brother. Just a week before all this, before we went out to work, my brother came to me and said, I cannot make it anymore. I said, what do you mean? He said, I can't do it. I'm finished. I says, you know what's going to happen to you? He says, I know what's going to happen to me. But I can't make it. I said, you have to. I'll help you. You go with me. I'll take care of you. He says, I can't make it. And I said, you got to. You can't stay behind. What they usually did is those people that stayed behind were picked up a little later, and they were all taken into the crematorium, every one of them. And I knew what was going to happen to you. So I said, you know, yes. He says, I know what's going to happen. We all knew what's happening. He says, okay, I'll tell you what, stay here. Let me go to the hospital. Now, we had a field hospital. It was a one-room hospital in the middle of the camp. It had about 4 beds in it, that nobody ever slept in it, except maybe twice a year. That was when the Swiss Red Cross used to come to the camp twice a year to check and make sure that the Germans didn't mistreat us. They would come into the camp and they would bring them into the hospital. It meant they would, the day before they came, the Germans knew they were coming. They would grab sick prisoners, so-called sick prisoners. They told them that they were sick, and they laid them down on these beds, and they told them to lay there because the Swiss Red Cross is coming and to play sick. And if you do, we'll give you good food after it's over. Well, everybody liked that. So people would just go and volunteer for it. And they had a doctor. I knew the doctor. He was a Jewish doctor that I knew from back home. I was a kid. I knew who he was. And he was the camp, so-called camp doctor. And they kept him also for the Swiss Red Cross. He was there 2 days out of the year waiting for the Swiss Red Cross. And they introduced him to the Red Cross. And I knew this doctor from home. So I went over to the hospital and I saw him. And he said, he knew me. And he said, what are you doing here? So I told him, I said, my brother, he says, I said, he can't go to work. So can you help me? He says, what do you mean? You know what's going to happen? Yes, I know. He said, bring him here. Let me handle him. And I said, okay. I went back to the barrack and I said, okay, let's go to the hospital. So we did. I went into the hospital. That was the doctor. He said, okay, just leave him here and you go on to work. And I did. I came back that evening looking for my brother. I couldn't find him. So I went to the doctor and I said, what happened? Where's my brother? He says, he's better off than where he was. I said, well, where is he? He says, it's not important. He's better off. I never saw him again. Whether he injected him with something or you get him something, I do not know. I never saw again. Now, I've written a book about this story here. And the lady that wrote my book went to the camps where I was in. So she gets some information about the camps to see where I was. So when she came back one time, she made 2 trips before she published the book. She told me that my brother was buried. She brought a picture back of a place where she thought he was buried. Now, I question that. I don't believe it. I don't think they were buried. They were burned. They put them on crematoriums and they burned them. They didn't go to all the trouble to bury anybody. So anyway, I just mentioned that. So finally, let me tell you about my Dead March. So they took us, I said, we went back to, they decided to take us back to Dachau. All the camps, these smaller camps, they brought all the prisoners back to Dachau. They decided the Americans came, they didn't want the Americans to find us, so they brought us back to Dachau, to the main camp. So we came back to Dachau, and then one day, they divided us in two groups, those that felt okay and those that didn't feel okay. So that created a problem. I didn't know whether I was okay or I wasn't okay, because if I'm not okay, they're gonna put us in the crematorium immediately. And if I'm okay, we didn't know what to be. So I talked to some of my friends there, and we decided to be okay. Well, the group that was okay, we marched out that evening. We went on a Dead March. And the group that was not okay, as a matter of fact, they were much better off, because the second day they were there, the Americans came in. But me being with a health group, they marched us out of there, and we marched, as I say, on a Dead March. They told us we're going to the Tyrolean Mountains to build trenches to keep the American tanks from advancing. In other words, the Germans built trenches on the German-French line. It was called the Maginot Line. They keep the French or the American or the English from advancing into Germany. But what the Americans did, they went around the trenches. They didn't go through them, they went around them, and they came to Germany. But the Germans were going to build trenches to keep the Americans from not being able to get across. Well, they never got to do it because the Americans surprised them and came across before we had a chance to build them. But anyway, so we were heading towards the Tyrolean Mountains to build these trenches. And on the third day, they didn't feed us anything. We ate in the daytime, we were marching to the fields, and we stopped, and being spring, being April, we ate off what grew. We ate carrots, onions, cabbage, whatever grew in the fields, we ate raw, and we went into the villages. We walked through the villages, and we went into behind the houses, and we ate out of the garbage cans. I ate stuff out of garbage cans that was there in no telling for how long in these garbage cans. We ate it out of there. So, of course, later on, I paid the price for that because I became sick. So, as a matter of fact, today, I'm still, at times, not always, I have these things in my nose, oxygen. I have to use oxygen for my lungs because I hurt my lungs during that period. So that's the price I paid for it. So finally, one day, while on that trip, walking on the Dead March, it was at night, and we were walking, and I saw a light in a house on my right side. I walked over there, I knocked on the door, and the door opened, And a little boy of about 5 years old opened up the door. When he saw me, he started screaming because I scared him. I was filthy, mud all over, it just overgrown, filthy. And his mother came running to the door. And she said, "My God, who are you?" in German. She said to me, "Well," I told her I was a prisoner. She said, "Yes, I can tell by your uniform, but what kind of prisoner?" I told her I was a Hungarian. I was afraid to tell her I was a Jew because she was a German and that scared me. I didn't want to tell her. So I told her I was Hungarian. And she said, "Well, come on in." She took me in and she sat me down, which surprised me. She would do that. I sat down and she said, "Well, you must wash up." So she took me into her bathroom and gave me soap, water. And so she told me to go wash my face, wash my hands. So I did. So I came out, sat down, and she said, "You must be hungry." I said, "Yes, I am." So brought a bunch of food, and I started eating, and I couldn't stop. I ate till I got sick. I started throwing up. I had diarrhea. I just couldn't stop. So finally, she took me away. She sat me down, and suddenly the door opened up, and a German soldier came in, and it scared me. And I said, "Oh my God, please." Her name was Smith. And I said, "Frau Smith, Miss Smith, please don't turn me over." She said, "I wouldn't turn you over. Don't worry. This fellow here is a good man. He's my friend. He's a German soldier, but he's not SS. He's the Wehrmacht, which is the regular army. He's not going to hurt you." He came over and he shook my hand. And I was surprised that he shook my hand. And he said, we'll keep you here. We're not going to turn you over. The Americans are just a couple of days away. And we'll turn you over when they get here." And they kept me there. They fed me. And the third day, she came in and she brought on a suit. And she said, "Put this on." She said, "They used to belong to my husband." And I put it on. And she said, "I want you to come and meet somebody." So I went outside, and there were some people there in uniforms. And I knew they were soldiers, but I didn't know what kind of soldiers. But I knew they were not German, I could tell, but I didn't know what American soldiers, whether it's British, American, French, Russian. They were all coming in that direction, but I couldn't tell where he belonged. So, and she spoke a little English, and she asked them who they were, and they said they were American soldiers. And she interpreted. She said, "They want to know what religion you are." And I said, "I'm Jewish." And they said, "Just a minute." They went outside and came back with another man. The other man said to me in Yiddish, he said, "They tell me that you're Jewish." And they said to me, "Are you Jewish?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, speak to me in Yiddish." And I said to him, "Said, what do you want?" in Yiddish. And he said, "Yes, he is." He said, "Look, I belong to a tank division, and I cannot stay here. I have to move on because the Germans haven't defeated yet. But these people here will take care of you." So he moved on. And I said, "Well, where are you from in America?" He said, "Brooklyn." But that's all he said. And he moved on. And I never got his name. I never, Brooklyn. Well, Brooklyn is a big city. So I never found the guy again. He moved on, and she took me and her friend, the German soldier, took me to a hospital there. There was a military hospital, a German military hospital that the Americans took over. And they brought some of their injured soldiers to this hospital. So they put me in there and kept me there for a week. I recovered. After a week, I felt better. So I called the UNRWA, which was the United Nations Relief Organization. And they got me in touch with the American Joint. They already had opened up an office immediately in Munich. And they put me into a camp in Passau, which is a city on the Danube River between Austria and Germany. And I was there, I went to school there, and I stayed there in 1946. All this happened in 1945. In 1946, I had to make a decision. I wasn't going to stay in Germany. And I had a choice to go to apply for a visa to America, go back to Hungary, which was Romania at this time, and I didn't want to go back there, or go to Palestine. But in Palestine, the English were in Palestine, and the ship loads, the people that went to Palestine in 1946 never got to Palestine. They took them to Cyprus. Cyprus is an island on the Mediterranean. It was occupied by the British. So they would take all these people that went to Palestine, they took them to Cyprus. When finally, when it became Israel, they took them from Cyprus to Israel. And I knew this. I knew it. I said, no, I don't want to do that. So my mother had a cousin in New York that I was aware of. And I knew her name. It was Dubs, D-U-B-S. So I went to the AJDC, American Joint Distributing Committee. And I told them about this cousin. And they found out for me where she lived. She lived in New York in the Bronx. And they put me in touch with them. So they sponsored me. In 1946, I applied for a visa. And in 1948, they called me and they told me my visa has been approved and they wanted me to come and pick it up. So I did, and I picked it up and I looked at it and my name was misspelled. So I said, you misspelled my name. He said, what do you mean? He said, this is not how I spell my name. It's misspelled. He says, okay, we can correct that, but you have to wait till it's approved. I said, for how long? He said, 2 years. I said, forget it. Just leave it like it is. So what they did is they spelled the name the German way, just a couple of letters, which is okay. Pronounce it the German way, Steinmetz, rather than the way I had it. There was an AI and there's an EI, so no big deal. So I came to New York. From New York, I went to Denver, Colorado. And from Denver, I went to school at night and I worked in a shoe store in the daytime. And one day a man came in. Is your name Max Steinmetz? And I said, yes. He says, your name was given to me. And I want to know, I have a job opportunity. You single? I said, yes. A job opportunity in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Well, I never heard of Albuquerque, New Mexico. He said, it's a nice city. We have a store there. And yes, there are Jewish people live in Albuquerque, and I would like for you to go there. And by the way, the company is owned by a Jewish family from Cincinnati, Ohio. And he said, if you accept the job, we're going to train you for 3 months in Ohio. And then I said, fine. I accepted the job. They took me to Ohio, and I trained in Kentucky, and not far from Cincinnati. And they sent me to Albuquerque, and I advanced a position. I was a manager. I became a supervisor. And they told me they had a position in Birmingham, Alabama. They wanted me to become they have a group of stores, and they want me to travel to Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, and supervise their stores. And I accepted. And of course, I changed jobs since, but here I am. I'm retired, as you all know. And I told you the story. I told this story many times to many people, many churches, many universities, many high schools, elementary schools. And I still do. I speak wherever I can, because I think it's very important for us to tell our story so that people never forget what happened and what they did to our people. So, Rabbi, if you have any questions, I'm not going anywhere. I'm here. If you have.
Well, I want to thank you. I want to put this on gallery view so everyone can see. And I want, Betty, if you can move in a little bit so we all can see what Max really found in Alabama wasn't just the stores. He found his beautiful bride, and now we know how you went full circle. You got a full tour of the United States before you made it. And how many years have the two of you been married now?
50, almost 59.
Mazel tov. And if it's okay, since we're talking about this being your story of survival, Max, can I share with everyone what birthday you just had this past week?
I'm sorry, I didn't.
Wants to know what birthday you had this past week.
Well, I'm still surprised that I'm here. My 96.
Ruben, would you lead us in a happy birthday for Max,
96.
please? 96. Kinahara.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Max. Happy birthday to you.
Admea Esrim, and I want a couple things. I want to see if there's any questions that we have. I'm putting in the chat. Oh, look at that. Ariana wrote happy birthday on her notepad over there.
Something. I want to say thank you to your people for coming there today and listening to me. And I also want to say thank you for my family and friends that they brought, that they put on for this. I appreciate that very much. Lisa, Karen, what you all did. I see you all.
And
I see.
we also have some friends from
Thank you,
Birmingham.
Jerry.
And
Thank you,
Melissa.
Andy. Thank you very much. Oh, I see quite a few people have signed up. Very good. Thank you. I appreciate it. It's good to see you all. Okay, Rabbi.
We're not going to let you go yet. A couple of things. We want to see if anybody has some questions. I also, though, want to say, I'm not sure if you can see, Max, but we have our newest temple member, Leo Penland is on the screen. He was born just a couple weeks ago, and it's very important that he's here hearing you as well. So from 96 to 3 weeks old, we can see here's little Leo right there. So just the importance of you being able to share your story.
Welcome to the world, Leo. Welcome to the world. You will be a blessing.
Well, when he gets to be older, you'll tell him about today.
Amen.
Good.
Already heard.
Amen. Well, I'm putting in the chat right now the link to, if anybody wants to buy, you can get Max's the book that was written, and I'm actually going to show. I want to show a picture from that book real quick, if that's okay, so people can see what this was. This is a picture of you. I think people should be able to see that. Let me see if I can make it a little bit bigger. Can people see that picture?
Yes.
This was you, Max, after the war?
Yes.
And
That's the first American I ever met. You cannot see him, but he stepped aside. So these are all former, what we call Häftlinge, prisoners in Germany. It's the first Americans we saw.
is this that story when you told us about the Americans? Is this that story?
Yes.
Wow.
No, that's not the American that he was talking about. This was afterwards.
Okay. And
Someone just asked if he had ever been back to Europe to visit.
oh, okay.
Answer that much.
Well, I have been back. Well, I've been back to Auschwitz, and I've been back to some of those places. But have I been back to my homeland? No, I have never gone back, because the people that I left behind, I thought were my friends, but they didn't lift an arm. When we were taken into the ghetto, the first thing they did, they broke into our house and stole everything. And no, I didn't want to go back to those type of people. I had no desire going back. I wanted to get far, far away from them.
What was?
I did go. As I said, I went to Auschwitz, to some of the camps, yeah, but not back to my birthplace. No, I didn't.
What was it like for you when you went back to Auschwitz?
Well, as a matter of fact, I went to the main gate, and I wanted to go into the barracks, and we were not able to go in, but we went up to a platform where you could overlook the camp. You walked up on the steps. There was a platform where they allowed you to look.
Like a watchtower.
Went to a watchtower, and we looked to the inside the camp from the watchtower, but I was not able to go in. I was not allowed to go in. And I went to Krakow, so Schindler's List.
We went
to Regensstadt. We went to some of those places, yes.
I'm looking to see if there's any questions.
I'd like to make a comment.
Please, Betty.
When we went to Auschwitz, they had a big urn with ashes. Betty said, "This is the closest that I will ever get to my parents' grave and my sister's grave."
Oh God!
It was representing the burning in the crematorium.
Wow.
Someone asked if you would make a parallel to what was going on today. I don't know whether you want to comment on that.
When you say what's going on, are they referring to January 6th? Is that what they're referring to?
I don't know. I don't know if we read it.
I think the question might have just been, do you see hate in our world today? Or I know that there's stories of genocide that happened to the Uyghur people in China, or what had happened in Rwanda or other places.
No, no, nothing compares to what happened. No, what's happening today worldwide has always happened since I was born. Some countries, there was misery in Africa and Asia. As long as I lived, they had misery in Africa and Asia. But nothing has happened as drastic as has happened to us. We were killed by the millions only because we were a race that Hitler didn't like. And he wanted to eliminate us completely. We committed no crime. The Jewish people didn't commit any crimes. They were good citizens of each country that they lived in, just like they are today. But yet, Hitler tried to eliminate us. And he had a lot of people that followed him. They followed him in Hungary, they followed him in Austria, and they followed him in Poland. Some of the governments worked with Hitler. They aligned themselves with Hitler. They did in Hungary. Horthy Miklos, who was the commanding person in Hungary, he did everything Hitler asked him to do. He rounded up the Jews.
There were two more questions. I think.
What? Elise, I'm going to ask this question on behalf of Elise Brown, and Elise is the daughter. Her mother, right, is a survivor as well. So Elise is asking, how did you get away from the Germans to find that house when you were on the death march? How exactly did you sneak away?
As I said, it was at night, and the Americans were getting closer and closer, and the Germans, the guards. We saw the guards taking off their uniforms and throw them away and throw them into the fields. I saw one guard taking his shotgun, his gun off. He ditched it into a field, into a ditch. I realized it's over. It's just a matter of hours or possibly days. And I decided to take my own chance. If I saw them getting away, I wanted to get away too. I just took a chance.
So you just
could have gone bad, very possible.
And you just ran off, like just kind of separated.
The only mistake I made, which I'll never forgive myself, I never went back to see that lady, because at the time I still didn't trust her. I was still, even though I was liberated, I still was afraid because she was German. The name German scared me so much that I don't think I trust them today.
Wow.
I just don't trust them. And that, although I think that was a mistake for my part, I should have gone back, and that's for many, many years ago. Her husband, she told me, was an SS officer on the Russian front. He was fighting in Stalingrad. When she said SS officer, I was afraid that she was part of that.
Wow.
But she was trying to use me to save her, which she didn't, because she really, if anything, maybe she did. She kept me till the Americans came, although nobody was after her. Nobody did any harm to her family. But I made a big mistake. I never went back to see her. I should have gone back and tried to reunite her.
Wow.
How old were you, Max?
How old was I at that time?
Yes.
18.
You were 18 when you...
21 when I was liberated.
20.
And your younger brother had been a year younger than you?
He was a year younger than I. he did fine until a month before liberation. He completely gave up. I couldn't make sense to him. I couldn't convince him he's okay. Although, looking back at it, I am not so sure that he would have survived the Dead March, because so many of us died off. What they used to do is they would walk and they would collapse, and the Germans would put their guns in the back of their necks and shoot them. And they had trucks riding behind us, picking up the bodies of the ones that they shot. So if you couldn't walk, they would shoot you right away and just load your body on a truck.
Wow.
So I'm not sure that he would have survived that much, because many of them didn't.
When you describe some of these stories for us, I think you have allowed us into these experiences that we just can't imagine. Even if we've seen movies or read books, we just can't imagine. And I can't imagine how painful it is for you to share as well. If it's okay with you, Max and Betty, I would like it if we could at least say Kaddish as a community in remembrance of your brother, your sister, and your parents. So before we end, and then we can take some more questions, as well as someone wants to know how Betty, you and Max met. So I want to make sure we hear those details, but it is amazing how that you are here, and in order for us to praise God, if that's okay, and also to remember your parents. What were your parents' names, Max?
My mother's Jewish name was Elke.
Elke.
Yes, Elke.
That's our niece.
We have a niece named Elke.
Was my father.
And what was your father?
Yosef.
Yosef. And your sister?
Esther.
And your brother was Henry?
Herschel.
And I see that we have your grandkids. Some of your grandkids are on here. Are any of them named for your family members?
Erica is named for Elka.
There's Erica. Okay.
Erica's named after my mother.
Yeah. Esther, my mom is Elka.
Okay.
Charlie is named for my side of the family. And Jack is named for my side of the family. And Ilana is named for Max's mother.
My mother, yeah.
And Hannah is named after, the middle name is Lillian, which was my mother's name. And Rachel is named after my grandmother Rose.
Well, if it's okay, I'm going to put up the words to Kaddish right now on the screen, so that we can say that as a community and as part of your both your actual family and your new Temple of Israel family. And let me go ahead and share the screen with these words, and then hopefully if anyone wants to stay on for a few more minutes, we can continue to ask some questions and share with you. But I want to make sure that we get a chance to honor their memories. So let me put this up on the screen for those who need the words. And I would say that, as is our tradition, feel free to rise in body or simply in spirit as we remember Max's parents, Elka and Yosef, as we remember Esther and Herschel, and as we remember all of the 6 million of our family who perished in the Holocaust. May their memories always be for a blessing, and may we continue to share their story. May we continue to show up as we did today to make sure that their memories are for a blessing and to make sure that we never forget. Praising God, we say Kaddish Yatom. Yitgadal v'yitkadash Shemei Rabbah. Yama divrach hirotei v'yamlik malchutei. B'chayechon v'yomechon uv'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael. Ba'agala uv'izman kariv v'imru amen.
Amen.
Yehi shmei rabba mivarach leolam omei omaya. Yitbarak v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yithadar v'yithaleh v'yithalal shmei dekudsha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechemata. Da'amin ram v'yalma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya. V'chayim aleinu v'yakol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'momav. Hu ya'aseh shalom. Aleinu v'yakol Yisrael v'imru amen. May their memories always be for a blessing, and let us say, amen. I want to thank everyone for being with us. You don't need to leave. You can definitely stay on. We're going to ask a few more questions. There's some great questions that have just come through. One question, Max, is what gave you the strength to keep going?
The desire to stay alive and to be able to do exactly what I'm doing today. I promised myself, if I survive, I'm going to tell people wherever I can, as much as I can. I may not be perfect in describing my situation. It's the best I can do, and as long as I'm alive, and as long as I'm healthy enough to do it, I will do it.
Kinahara, thank you for bearing witness so that we can bear witness as well.
It took him a long time to speak out now. It was probably not until the middle 90s that he started really talking about the Holocaust. He kept it within himself. I suppose not to burden anybody else, his family nor his friends. And he was, our middle daughter, Lisa, sort of prodded him into speaking out after having spent 6 weeks in Israel in the high school in Israel program. And she came back and she was very vocal about how he had not spoken to his children.
Yes, she wanted to know why in Israel they talk about it, yet I haven't said a word. Nobody said a word at the time. And I said, okay, it's a new ballgame.
Did you have an answer for her as to why you weren't able to talk about it?
I think it was just the way almost everybody who went through that experience, I think it just took them a long time to bring it out. It was just so deep, such a deep hurt.
We were working so much, so deep, that you simply could not come out and talk about it.
People are saying the same thing about their families. It was just true of so many of the survivors that they really didn't want to burden or bring it up. I guess it kept reliving, and it was hurtful.
Did Max share with you, Betty, when you guys first met? Did you know that he had survived?
He told me the whole story when we first met, and then he really, after that, he wanted to live a normal, he just, thank goodness he never had to have a psychiatrist or anything. He just wanted to live normally and raise his family, which he's done beautifully. And I think that he just wanted to share nothing that was horrible with his family, because he wanted them to be happy and wanted them to see life in a better way. I think that all of our children and grandchildren, though, and the new children that our children have married have all been very interested and grateful to have the opportunity to meet him and know him and to share this part of the story that it was his life.
Well, thank you. I want to see, we have a few kids who are still on, if any of them have any questions. Just want to see, Tessa, I see, Tessa, you're up there. Did you have a question to ask or? No? Okay, okay. And then wanted to see if your family, if there's anything any of the family wants to say about your father or your grandfather, if anyone wants to say something. I see Lisa. Lisa, do you want to share anything?
Yeah, my dad is an amazing man, and I hear that story. I mean, I know the story. I know what he wrote in the book, and I cry every time I hear it. He didn't talk about it because I think that we were in Birmingham, and we were integrated with a lot of people who weren't Jewish. It's a very southern town, and my mom's from Birmingham. She grew up in Birmingham. There was a lot of segregation in Birmingham at the time in the 60s when I was born. Even the school I went to had sororities that Jewish girls couldn't be in. And there were country clubs that Jewish people couldn't be in. We had our own country club, our own Jewish country club. So I think that talking about it was just something my dad thought was not appropriate. And he really didn't have any friends who had been survivors. There weren't very many in Alabama. And growing up, he really wasn't friends with anybody. I think he had one friend who had survived. So yeah, I think it was really a difficult thing for him. But I went to Israel and came back very well with a lot of questions. They asked me to speak at Yad Vashem. They asked me to light a candle because they asked all the kids who were on my trip who had a survivor in their family to light a candle. And then they started asking me questions. I'm like, I don't know. I don't have an answer to these questions. So it upset me that I didn't have answers to what happened to my dad and my whole family. So I started asking. He didn't really start speaking right then because I was 18 at that point or 17. He started speaking a little bit later when I was probably maybe out of college. I can't remember exactly when, but he had been thinking about it. And then after speaking for some years, a long time, he wanted to write this book, and I was going to try to help him write the book. I'm a lawyer, and I was going to try to help him write this book, but I'm in Atlanta, and it was very difficult for me to try to interview him. I needed hours and hours of time. So the woman who ended up writing the book with him, her name is Amy McDonald. She's amazing. She's a history teacher, and she had all the facts about what had happened during the war. She knew what happened. I didn't have all that knowledge. So she was the better person to help him write the book. And the book is not your normal Holocaust survivor book. It has facts in it about what happened, the time frame, and all the history is in that book. And she actually she has more knowledge probably than other people who have written these kind of books before. It's a different kind of book. And I'm so proud of him, and my mom too. He couldn't do this without my mom. They're amazing. And somebody asked how they met, and Mom didn't say it, but they met on a blind date. So after he moved to Birmingham, he was a really handsome, eligible Jewish man, and she was single, and they were set up on a date, and they had been married they had me after they'd been married for a couple of years. So I'm about to be 57 this year. So they're about to hit 59. So anyway, I just wanted to say, I love that he speaks, and it always makes me emotional, but I'm just thrilled that people want to hear it. I have some friends that are listening right now on this Zoom, and my friends have bought his book, or, it's just amazing. So thank you, Dad. I love you, and Mom.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa. I want to see if any of I know your daughter's on, if there's anyone else who wants to share any family. I think it's so beautiful to hear this legacy from the family as well. And Max, I want you to know, one of our younger kids who's been watching, Everett, he's just turned 9. He wants to know if you were ever scared at night, and what did you do to be brave when you were in the camps?
Were you ever scared at night? And what did you do to make yourself brave at night? At night in the camp, when you slept, when you probably fell asleep
we were so tired and we were so hungry hunger preoccupied our time. We were constantly hungry. So
He weighed 80 pounds when he was liberated.
And he was 6'1".
And he was 6'1".
As a matter of fact, the first American soldier, this is I'll never forget. He looked at me, he wanted to know how tall I was. And he said, "Do you mind taking off your clothes?" So I looked at him, I said, "What do you mean take off my?" He says, "I want to take a picture and I want to send it back home to my parents in America to show them what they did to you." Just like that. I said, "What they did to you?" I said, "Sure." And I took my clothes off. I weighed 80 pounds.
It is a miracle that you survived.
6'1", tall, 6'1", and weighed 80 pounds.
Wow.
They used to call me a Muslim. You know, that's in India. Those are those holy men. They're called Muslims. They're so thin and skinny and.
Yes. Wow. Erica, I see you on the screen. Is there anything you'd like to say to your grandfather?
Just that I love him. I've heard this story like a lot, just like throughout my entire life growing up. I think I don't even remember how old I was the first time I heard it, but like I have very vivid memories of going to, he would speak a lot at colleges in like Alabama area. And since we were in really try to attend those whenever we could get the chance. So I think like the earliest memories I have, oh, I think I'm frozen. Oh, never mind. The earliest memories I have were when I was like fairly young, like just learning about this. Like it's definitely been a part of like just like my growing up. And by this point, you would think I would be like desensitized to the story, but I'm not. Like it's still just like absolutely horrifying. I went to Israel last December, and when I went to Yad Vashem, it was just really hard to be there with that connection. But I also felt like not like at peace with it, but I felt like I needed to see something like that and like be at that place to like really feel, I don't know, like connected to my grandfather in that way too. And yeah, just really proud of him for being able to be strong enough to tell that story over and over and over again.
I think that's going to make, of all of this, that's going to be one of the things that makes me cry is to hear a granddaughter say that she's proud of her grandfather. And I think that that is beautiful, and that is a testament to how you, Max and Betty, have raised your kids to then raise their grandkids, their kids, your grandkids, to feel that way. So Erica, thank you so much for sharing. I just, again, want to see if there's any other family members who wanted to say anything, and then if we have any other questions from any of our congregants. And anybody else gonna?
I want to say that we're proud of all of our children and our grandchildren. We love them and we appreciate them, and we're glad that they put up with us.
Amen. Amen. Is there anyone else who wanted to say anything? Well, I do hope that Max and Betty, you will come back and visit us again, whether it's by Zoom or in person. And Ruben and I are going to have to take a road trip out to Alabama to visit you guys.
That'd be wonderful. Thank you. You're all invited. Just call us and let us know you're coming.
Any excuse to be on the road.
And I'm going to let us end with one more question then. There's some great questions in here. So for those of you who didn't maybe get to ask your question, Betty, is it okay if I share your email address with the congregation?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'll make sure to include your email address so people can write to Max and Betty. And the last question, and I want to say this, I saw it earlier on, was what is the one thing you want to leave with for the children to know? What's the one thing for the youth to know?
What is the one message that you want the children to know, that you would like to leave with the children that are watching, the future generation?
Well, good question. After I talked so long and so much, I don't know if there's anything left for me to say, but I want them to be good people. I want them to be good Jews. And I don't necessarily mean very religious Jews. But by good Jews, I mean good people. That's very important. Just to be good people, treat others as fine people. That's the most important thing to me. Be good human beings. Treat everybody, regardless of religion or color. Just treat people as human beings, people that have a right to be here and live. Very important.
Max, that reminds me of the Jewish quote that in a place where there is no humanity, strive to be a human being. And you have seen that lack of humanity, and you have come out to survive, to grow this gorgeous family, to have this lasting legacy. And we are so grateful that you are willing to share that with us. And you also shared with us what it means to have a will to survive. So thank you for truly inspiring all of us. We want to wish you well, and I hope everyone will join with me in wishing Max a happy birthday. And thank you so much for being with us. And we look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I just want to say thank you very much, Rabbi, for what you did today. I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Well, it's an honor for all of us. I want to thank everyone, and I can't wait to meet you and your family in person. So with that, I'm going to stop recording for a moment, but if the family